display of 10th century Viking. This is our treasure hoard. These are reproductions of actual pieces that have been found in Viking treasure hoards, primarily the Quairdale hoard in England. And as you can tell, some of the Viking treasure hoards were 80% Arabic silver. So we can represent that. And the fact that the trade routes extended to at least northern India, and in this case, the Chinese Buddha. We've got amber from the Baltic. Carnelian and crystal necklaces, exact replicas of the real ones. This is a map that was done by an Irish monk in about the 10th century, about 975. The original's in the British Museum on parchment. This is on goatskin.
Satisfied. Gather round, the lords and ladies, for a demonstration of the Viking Art of War. Walter, please.
Come in closer. Come in. What's in your world? I'm dressed as a Viking, an early period Viking of the 8th and 9th century, when Vikings first started raiding. 2 or 3 ships would land in England, in France, and a few raiders would come out. They'd be dressed much like I am, if they were wealthy. I'm wearing a helmet. I have a sword. I'm wearing chainmail. Not very many Vikings in the 8th and 9th century would have had. So I'm a wealthy warrior. During the later part of the Viking period, armies of 120 to 400 ships were besieging Paris. Then you'd be dressed more like the middle 2 gentlemen there, with chainmail from head to toe, fingers to toes, completely covered. We're wearing chainmail at 16,000 to 30,000 links of metal. Why would you wear this? Because that's a weapon that you're protecting against. This protects against a slicing blow. These are not thrusting weapons. Notice there's a point, but not much of one. Most of the battle was slashing and hacking attacks. Yes?
If you're slashing or hacking, then why weren't the swords curved?
Because with a curved sword, that's a slicing attack. The curved sword is much more effective with a slice, usually against an unarmored opponent. This is a sword that's most effective breaking bones, cutting off limbs in a straight attack. Question? Yes? Unlike the movies, this sword is under 3 pounds. Most of them were about 2.5 pounds. Reason is simple. I've got to swing this for a couple of hours if I'm lucky in a battle. Now, recognize that from the time that they're young,
Hard. Harder. Now hit it over here. And then back on the other side. See how easy it is to move around? Heavy sword would not allow it. You want to try it?
Now, this sword has a groove down the middle. That is a fuller, and its intention is to lighten the sword, but like a railroad I-beam, to make it stiff enough so that it flexes without breaking. This is a primary weapon, and again, if I were wealthy, I would have one. They came in all lengths and weights, and as you can see, most Vikings would have a backup weapon, a knife, or a shorter sword called a sax, a long knife. Look at the shield.
Sacks. They come in larger sizes than this.
A larger size.
Oh, like that.
Show us your saxes.
Cutter.
I'll take
Thrust skirt.
And notice, straight on, this is a weapon. This is an enormous amount of protection for me, and if you've ever watched a lot of movies, most of the fighting is sword on sword. That almost never happens, because why ruin a good sword? Why put yourself at risk when a good shield is an enormous amount of protection? Now you saw the duel between two of them. What happens later in the Viking period is that when armies get in the field, you get the shield wall. And you get this. The reason is, this provides a bristling point of attack and defense. We're now an army, and we can fight very effectively and protect each other extremely well. Now, the helmet. The helmet I'm wearing was used for practically 1,000 years. The Romans had helmets just about like this. This helmet, though, is good for an individual warrior, but not as good if you're an army, because it echoes in here. It's good protection, but as armies developed, you get rid of the ears and you add the chainmail coif that you can wear up your head, and that is effective. It's still got nose protection, which you need, but again, a simpler, more comfortable helmet to wear, just as heavy. Now, this is a good sword if I've got money, but look how much steel and the skill that goes into this. Most Vikings would have had a spear, and for that, Fred will talk about it.
Good afternoon. Well, where Jack is representing an upper-class Viking, perhaps a Jarl, or what we in English would call an Earl, I'm more of a middle-class Viking, what nowadays would be called a National Guardsman. I've got another job other than warrior. I run a farm. I raise horses and cattle and sheep. Occasionally, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, I go out on raiding parties that are led by the chieftain in the region that I live in. But most of the time, I'm not a warrior. I'm not a full-time warrior, at least. So I have a little bit different kit than what Jack was showing you. I don't have any chainmail. If I had that much iron available, I'd probably use it to make implements that are going to help me run the farm. The weapons I'm carrying are spears rather than a sword. You can see how much steel it takes to make a spear, and the rest of it is wood, something that's readily available. It also takes less skill on the part of the metalsmith to make the spear point than it does to make the sword. Yes?
Would you also use it for like hunting game?
Yeah, actually some spears like this were used for hunting game. Boar in particular could be hunted with a spear. But typical hunting weapons we'll talk about when we talk to the archer was probably a more common weapon for hunting the types of game that the Norsemen would encounter. The spear, unlike the sword that Jack was talking about, is a thrusting weapon. And one of the advantages of the spear, in addition to the fact that it's easier to manufacture, you can take more of these with you on the ship, you can make more of them in a shorter period of time, is the length of the reach that the spear has. Look at the reach that I've got with this weapon compared to what the swordsman has. I'm already touching his shield, he's not even close to me. And so it's a more effective combat weapon if I'm using it as a thrusting weapon. This can also, if I put enough force behind it, it can penetrate the chainmail. The mail is designed to prevent injuries from cuts, but the edges of this spear are sharpened, and it has a sharp point on it. And particularly, if if I'm fighting without the shield and I'm using this two-handed, I can get quite a strong thrust with the spear that'll penetrate easily through that chainmail. Now, what's the other thing you think about when you think about spears? So you think about not using them as a hand weapon, but as a throwing type weapon. And for that, we wouldn't throw away a nice heavy spear with a good solid ash shaft like this, because what happens if I throw this spear at you and I miss?
It doesn't come back.
You now have a new weapon to use against me, don't you? So the throwing type spears were these types of weapons, small, lightweight weapons. These have been around long before the Vikings. These go back to Greek times. This is called a javelin, and it's a throwing weapon. It's also a thrusting weapon or a point type weapon. And as a last resort, of course, I could use this as a hand-to-hand combat weapon, but it's probably not really desirable because the shaft is so light and thin, it's easily broken. If things come to the point where I've lost my spear,